Check. Baruch Hashem. All right, who's going to be first? Who is tuning in, and where are you tuning in from? Oh, unplug that. Who's in the house? Where are you watching from? Let me just get the two streams in front of me. It's so odd how there's just no consistency to this. Sometimes it connects quickly. Sometimes it takes some time. All right, I'm pretty sure we are on, there we go, on YouTube. And Raphael Abramov says, Shalom from Denver. Have a blessed Shabbos, my friend. Good Shabbos to you, Raphael. Here we go. Jenny Erickson is in the house from Arizona. Rochelle Rosen from Modesto. Yehudit Sobel, top fan, because you comment and come all the time. It's great to see you. Says Shalom from Florence, South Carolina. Margaret Sapir says, Shabbat Shalom from Puerto Rico. Bienvenida. Nice to see you. Clay Cordell says Clay is in from Boiling Springs, South Carolina. Paul Papazinski from Louisiana. Yaakov Eliyahu Goldberg says Shabbat Salam. Very nice. Joyce Noah, Shalom from Antwerp, Belgium. Greetings to you, greetings to you, Joyce. And Owen Meyer, Shalom from New York City. Welcome, everybody. A Guten Erev Shabbos. Shabbos is coming in tonight. We can't wait. Shabbos is, it's just the best. Thank God. All the work of the week, all the hurry, all the bustle, all the stress, all the constantly tuning into our smartphones to see what's the latest outrage. It all stops and we can't wait. Let us light up the darkness. And let us make a l'chaim in honor of the Shabbos which comes tonight. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol nihiyeh b'divrah. L'chaim, my good friends. All right, we've got an exceptionally busy daf today. I only point out, I don't do the whole daf. It's not that kind of daf yomi shir that I teach. I try to point out crucial concepts in each page that I can go a little bit deeper on and share with you what's going on. But when there are a bunch of key concepts on a daf, we got to cover them all, at least the key concepts, and there's a bunch of key concepts in this daf. So let's get right into it. We are on page Daf Hey, 105, Kuf Hey, page 105 of Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. Today we're finishing chapter 12 by ending our discussion of Mishnah 4, a very quick discussion of Mishnah number 5. Then we'll open chapter 13, a quick discussion of Mishnah 1, and then get into Mishnah number 2, which has some really, really deep teachings about anger and mourning. So let's get into first wrapping up our discussion of writing, the prohibition of writing on Shabbos. That's where we are, wrapping up Mishnah number 4 of chapter 12. Yesterday, several people asked, what if one writes one letter on Shabbos? Now, we know that the minimum measure to become liable to bring the sin offering for violating the biblical, which is to say the Torah prohibition of writing on Shabbos, the minimum measure is 2 letters. In fact, 2 letters that have meaning. The whole idea of becoming liable for the Torah prohibition is that you create something which endures. So the sages understand that in terms of writing, that if you just write 2 letters that are nonsense, it won't endure. But 2 letters that form a word will have this idea of enduring, of durability, and therefore you become liable. So the question was, well, what if you write one letter, but it has meaning to you, either because all the Hebrew letters also have numerical values, so perhaps you wrote this one letter to remind you of a number, or because that one letter has meaning to you, will you become liable for violating the Torah prohibition? And in fact, we're going to have a discussion of that today. So your question will be answered. Now, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beteira, and this is the sage who in yesterday's, if you didn't see yesterday's show, that is when you really want to go back and see. Daf 104 is just one of those really, this is a big daf today with a lot of stuff. Yesterday's was a key daf. It's just one of those pages you really must see with several famous teachings related to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beteira is the one who brought down that, this hidden, the word mayim, the word for water, is hidden in the laws of Sukkot, of the offerings that are brought on the 7 days of Sukkot, and brought out a whole bunch of ideas based on that hidden presence of the word mayim, water, in those verses from the Torah. Today, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beteira teaches us that if one writes letters that form an abbreviation, an acronym, right? And he says, so he says, I just want to make sure I get this right. I think he says, even if you write one letter and it is an abbreviation for you, let me just double check this and make sure I get it right. Yeah, if one wrote one letter as an abbreviation, and the word for that the sages use is actually based on a Greek word, notarikon, representing an entire world. So one letter that is an abbreviation for a meaning. This is the same question we had yesterday. You write one letter and it has meaning for you. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beteira deems him liable to bring the sin offering for violating the Torah prohibition of writing on Shabbos. But the rabbis deem him exempt. So then they discuss, well, what is between them? Why is Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beteira going to find liability? And the rabbis are going to say no. So this idea of abbreviation, that a letter can stand for something larger, it makes sense, right? So a letter can be used to symbolize. I mean, if you see the letters US, it might be the word us referring, the pronoun, the objective pronoun of ourselves. But most people, when they see those two letters, especially capitalized, and in Hebrew, there's no difference between capitalized and not capitalized. All letters are the same, except for final letters at the end of a word, as we saw yesterday. But in English, the two letters capitalized, US, most people will see that and think United States. So there's definitely meaning there. One letter, I mean, there's not so many English letters that one letter has this kind of universal meaning. But if that one letter means something to you, this is the question that we're looking at. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beteira is going to look into the Torah and to show that letters can have meanings of words greater than themselves. And it's interesting that where he finds a source for that is when Abraham, or in Hebrew Avraham, was renamed. Recall that in the book of Genesis, Abraham's name was not Abraham for the first part, for the majority of his life. It's only when he became older that he was renamed. His initial name was Avram, and then he became Avraham when God said to Avram, I'm going to change your name, as it is stated. Neither shall your name anymore be called Avram, but your name shall be Avraham. For the father of a multitude of nations, Av Hamon Goyim, have I made you. This is Genesis chapter 17, verse 5. The verse itself contracts Av Hamon, father of a multitude, into Avraham. The words Av Hamon themselves are interpreted as an abbreviation. I have made you a father, Av. For the nations, I have made you chosen, Bahur, among the nations. I have made you beloved, Chaviv, among the nations. I have made you melech, a king for the nations. I have made you distinguished, vatik, for the nations. I have made you trusted, ne'eman, for the nations. So we see that God himself, God's self, introduced this idea that I'm going to add a letter to your name. Now, the more common understanding is the letter that was added was hey, and that's a letter that we associate with God's name. And so it's like Avram became attached to God, and that's why God added a hey to his name. God did the same for Abraham's wife, Sarah. Her name was initially Sarai. It became Sarah when a hey was added to the end of her name. But here we see the sages interpret that actually each of the letters that are involved in that renaming process stand for something greater, introduced, the process of sort of adding those additional meanings through the letters was introduced by God. And Rabbi Yochanan himself said that the word Anochi, so recall that in Hebrew you can say I, the pronoun for myself. I do this, I do that. There's two words for that, either ani or anochi. Anochi is a little bit more formal, and that's the word that God uses when he introduces the Ten Commandments, the first time that God speaks to a multitude of people at once at Mount Sinai. God speaks to 2 million people who are gathered there and says, I am the Lord your God. And the Ten Commandments are repeated twice in the Torah. The word Anochi in Hebrew, which begins the Ten Commandments, is an abbreviation for I myself wrote and gave. Ana nafshi ketivat yehavit. And the rabbis will offer a few other interpretations of what that abbreviation, what Anochi stands for. But let's just stop with I myself, Ana nafshi. I, Ana, nafshi, my soul, myself, right? Ketivat, wrote, yehavit, gave. This is so important because when you really wrap your mind around the first commandment, it doesn't even sound like a commandment. A commandment is thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that. That sounds like a commandment. But the first commandment of the Ten Commandments, and in many ways, the ultimate, basic, fundamental commandment that underlies all of Torah is, I am the Lord your God. How is that a commandment? That's not a commandment. That's a statement, a fact. God says, I am the Lord your God. Why is that a commandment? Why is that the opening of the Ten Commandments? Because of this. Anochi stands for I myself wrote and gave. And the way we understand this is that God places God's self in the Torah. God dictated the Torah to Moses. Moses set it down for us. But God himself wrote the Ten Commandments on that first set of tablets. The reason that Torah study is so important, the reason we devote ourselves to it, the reason you and I are here right now learning Torah together, using the tool that's at our disposal in the 21st century, this online connection. But the reason that Jews have, slaved over, dedicated themselves in the most passionate way to studying Torah for over 3,000 years is because it is the closest that we can come to God in this world. We're in God, right? It's not that God is in the sky somewhere and we're here. We're in God. But the closest that we can come in relationship to God, to feeling God's presence, to being in God, with God in God's mind, as it were, is when we study Torah. Why? Because God places God's self in the Torah. God gave the Torah himself and created this, this eternal edifice. The Torah is an eternal structure, all with its doors always open, inviting us in to sit and stay a while with the Lord, the creator of the universe. And it's important to really wrap our heads around that. And that's why our sages will spend so much time and energy, figuring out the littlest definitions, the littlest distinctions, the littlest differences. In a while, in the next chapter, we're going to open what is the minimum measure for violating the prohibition of weaving on Shabbos. And they're going to get so intricate about, when the weaver attaches 2 threads to the loom, not one thread, but 2 threads, and then the particular weaving pattern of going in and out. When they're getting so hyper-specific, it's because they're coming close to the mind of God. They're approaching God. We can never know God. God is an eternal being, so beyond us that we can't even imagine the most infinitesimal small part of God. But what can be imagined by humans is available to us, we're invited to come closer to God in Torah study. Prayer, of course, is incredibly important. Prayer is when we speak to God. But Torah is when God speaks to us, and we can come to know a little bit more of Godself and be a little closer, be more in relationship when we dedicate ourselves to studying Torah. So we say that one of the highest mitzvahs, one of the highest commandments that we can fulfill is to study Torah for Torah's sake. But what we mean by that is we study Torah so that we can come closer to God. Okay. And so we get that from learning here that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Beteira says, so if you write just one letter, because these letters can be abbreviated, right? And even the first letter of the Ten Commandments has Godself in it, as it were. So much is represented there. So then we should be liable if we write one letter and we intend by writing that one letter to carry information that we want to remember, and we write that down on Shabbos. Therefore, we should be liable for violating the Torah prohibition. But the sages say, no, that's too much. The minimum measure is 2 letters that have a meaning. And so that's where the rule comes out. To be liable to bring the sin offering for the Torah violation, it takes 2 letters that operate, or 2 symbols that can be put together to have meaning. And just in case we have any doubt, so I'm going to go into Shulchan Aruch, and we've had this question before. So we'll refer to this as Kitzer. Kitzer says this, Kitzer says that. What this is Kitzer, is the Kitzer, the small Shulchan Aruch. It's like the most compact. It's still 5 volumes long. But it's basically virtually all of the laws that a Jew needs to know in order to live an observant Jewish life. Originally set down by Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch, and then with a commentary, several other Shulchan Aruchs have been created. This one is created by Rabbi Shlomo Gansfried in 1864. He is commonly called Kitzer. His name is not Kitzer, but he wrote the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, and so very often we'll refer to a great writer, we'll sort of call him by the name of his most prominent work. A good example of that is the Chofetz Chaim. So we'll say the Chofetz Chaim says. His name was not Chofetz Chaim, that was his most important book, but we'll call him that. So Kitzer says, regarding writing on Shabbos, just the final word of what is the law that we follow, it is prohibited to write or to make any drawing or symbol, even by merely using one's finger to trace with liquid that is on the table or the condensation that is on a glass window. It's prohibited de Rabbanan. It's prohibited by rabbinic decree. If you write in liquid on a table, you do not become liable to bring the sin offering. You are exempt from bringing the sin offering. You did not violate the Torah prohibition of writing on Shabbos, but you would have violated the rabbinic decree. And likewise, it is prohibited to make a mere impression with one's fingernail on some object, as in making a mark. It is prohibited to write or draw anything else, even though it will not endure. Why does it say that? Because the things that do endure, any kind of writing that does endure, that's when you trigger the Torah prohibition. Just as it is prohibited to write, so too it is prohibited to erase anything that has been written. Nevertheless, those cakes upon which letters or drawings were made may be broken and eaten on Shabbos. So if there was a birthday cake and it said happy birthday, so there's writing on top of the cake, and then when you slice it up and eat it and everybody eats it, they're destroying that writing. But that's okay because that writing was never meant to endure. It was meant to be eaten. And now here, when I looked this up, I was a little bit surprised and I went, yikes! Regarding books that have letters written on the outsides of their pages. That would be like this. I have marked books like that in the past. There are authorities who prohibit opening or closing them on Shabbos. There are, however, others who permit this, and such is the common practice. Nevertheless, according to Kitzer, since there are those who prohibit this, one should in the first place refrain from writing in this manner. So, my holy books that I do open on Shabbos, and some of which have writing on the side like this, I'm going to keep opening them because generally that's permitted and most permit that. But Kitzer is saying since some people prohibit that, maybe it's better not to mark your book that way. I didn't know until I looked this up. Now I know. Okay. And that's it for Mishnah number 4. Mishnah number 5, which ends chapter 12 of Tractate Shabbos, very short. One who writes 2 letters on Shabbos, separated. He writes 2 letters, both during a period of unawareness, but those 2 periods of unawareness are separated by a period of awareness. In other words, in the morning, he forgets that it's Shabbos, and he writes 1 letter, unwittingly violating Shabbos because he didn't know it was Shabbos. Then later in the day, he's like, oh my gosh, today's Shabbos, I shouldn't have done that. And then later still in the day, he forgets that it's Shabbos again and writes another letter in a lapse of awareness. Those 2 letters were both written on Shabbos, but separated by a period of awareness. That makes the 2 events of their writing independent, and they do not combine to trigger liability to bring the sin offering. This is to tell you that if he wrote 1 letter at 10 a.m., and then, at noon, he wrote a second letter, and during that whole period, he was unaware that it was Shabbos, so then the 2 letters could combine, and he would be liable to bring the sin offering for the unwitting violation of writing on Shabbos. Okay, that is the end of chapter 12. Now we're going to open chapter 13, and here we're going to move away from writing, and we're going to get into some other primary categories of labor that's prohibited on Shabbos. Specifically, we're going to be talking about weaving and its related primary categories. So much of the work that went into building the tabernacle, which was a magnificent tent, of course, was creating the fabrics that the tabernacle was made out of. And so unlike construction, which, everything is subsumed within it, right? Hammering and sawing and measuring and, all these different, maybe not measuring, but all these different labors that are part of construction are all part of the one category called bone, building. But weaving, creating those fabrics, now there's a lot of other primary categories, which include weaving and spinning and dyeing, just a lot to create the fabrics, and they're all considered primary categories. We're going to be talking about that. In this chapter, we're also going to be talking about trapping an animal. Mishnah number 1. Rabbi Eliezer says, one who weaves. Rabbi Eliezer is going to say that the minimum measure for a weaver to trigger liability for violating the Torah prohibition of weaving on Shabbos is going to be 3 threads, that he starts 3 threads at the beginning of the whatever fabric he's weaving. the rabbis are going to overrule Rabbi Eliezer and say the minimum measure is 2 threads. The minimum measure for weaving is going to be 2 threads or 2 stitches if one is sewing. Sewing is different than weaving. The minimum measure is 2 stitches. But also tearing a garment. If you make a rip in a garment, how big a rip is going to trigger the liability for the sin offering? If you rip enough so that if you repair the rip, it would take 2 stitches or more, then you're going to be liable to bring the sin offering. And we learn from that sometimes we tear in order to repair. What's a good example of that? I mean, you can imagine that a tailor who is adjusting, a jacket, right? That I gained a little weight, I'm fatter, I don't fit in my old suit. So I take it to the tailor, he's gonna adjust my suit. He's gonna open seams, so that then he can close them up again. Some of the seams are going to be repaired right where they were, just so that he gets access to another part of the cloth. He can make an adjustment there, and then he sews up that first part. So it's very common that we will tear something in order to repair it. Why do the sages mention that? Because if you do something that is purely destructive, right, you're just destroying, not in order to rebuild, but you just tear something down. So that's not a constructive labor, and you will not be liable for violating Shabbos if you simply demo something, if you just tear something down. But if in any way you're tearing it down in order to build it up again, tearing to repair, tearing to rebuild, destroying to rebuild, that is going to be considered a constructive labor and will trigger liability for violating the Torah prohibition. Okay. Mishnah number 2. Now here's going to get very interesting. Mishnah number 2. One who rends, so ripping, tearing, one who rends garments in anger or mourning the dead, such a person is exempt. He didn't violate the Torah prohibition. As I just mentioned, destructive labor is exempt, but somebody who destroys in order to repair or rebuild is liable. Regarding this idea that one who tears his garments because he's in mourning, right, despair over losing somebody that he cares about, or because he's angry and he rips his garments, and that this person is exempt. So the Gemara objects immediately. What are you talking about? We have a baraisa, we have another teaching of the earlier sages, the Tanaim, which says that one who tears his garment as an act of mourning the dead on Shabbos is liable for violating the Torah prohibition. This is a direct contradiction. So which is it? If a person loses a loved one and tears his clothing at the moment of death, is he liable? And this happens on Shabbos. Is he liable for violating Shabbos, or is he not liable for violating Shabbos? As we'll see, there's 2 different cases at work here. If, God forbid, your parent dies on Shabbos and you're there, so you tear your clothing, even if you're not there. If you lose your parent, if you lose, God forbid, a child, if you lose immediate relatives, I believe the list is a spouse, a sibling, a parent, or a child, you are obligated to tear your garment. If you lose someone that you care very much about, you care so much and you're so broken up that they died, and you express that grief by tearing your garment, but you weren't obligated to tear your garment because it's not an immediate relative, in that case, you are exempt. You did not violate the Torah prohibition. The difference is one who is obligated is achieving something, is doing something constructive by tearing their garment because they're obligated. One who is just grieving and tears his garment to show that he's grieving is not accomplishing something constructive, as it were. They're just expressing an emotion. So the one who loses not the immediate relative, exempt. The one who tears his garment because he loses an immediate relative on Shabbos, liable. What is he supposed to do? Well, one answer would be you can wait until after Shabbos to tear your garment. Another answer is you just desecrate Shabbos because your grief is so great and you did it. And in fact, one who tears his garment because he's obligated to tear a garment for the death of an immediate relative, and he tears it on Shabbos, he desecrates Shabbos. One might ask, well, maybe because he desecrated Shabbos, he has not fulfilled his obligation to tear his garment for the loss of the immediate relative. And the answer is yes, he has. He has fulfilled his obligation in terms of mourning the immediate relative, and he desecrated Shabbos. Okay. Apropos of rules of mourning the dead, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions and comments about this, so put them in. Nina will gather them for me, and I'll address when we reach the end of the class. Okay. So apropos of mourning, we learned that when a Torah scholar dies, when a great sage of a generation dies, everybody, or at least all the Jews, tear their garments. The question is everybody obligated to tear their garments? And most say that it's a lenient ruling on this. Everybody's not obligated to tear their garments. Everyone is certainly permitted to tear their garments. And the way that this is practiced generally today is that people who actually learned from the Torah scholar, who learned directly from this teacher, this great teacher in the generation, they will be the ones who really observe that practice and tear their garments when such a person dies. When an upright person dies, and by an upright person, we're saying basically a saint, somebody who just lived their life, so beautifully, somebody that we would never suspect that they violated any of the commandments, that they did anything immoral. They were just, and not only that, not only did they fulfill all of their obligations, but they were great practitioners of chesed, of loving kindness. You get the picture. Basically one of those people that is just beloved by the masses because they're so saintly. Or maybe they weren't that well known, but you knew that this person was that kind of an upright person. So even if you're not related to them, it is a practice to tear your clothes for such a person. Some would even say it's obligated, but generally the practice is that even for such a saint, the only people who tear their clothes are the ones who are there and witness this person dying. And in fact, when any Jew dies, any Jew, right? So even one who's not so saintly, but you're there and actually witnessed the death, and you're a Jew, so then you're obligated to tear your clothing for there because you were there, you witnessed it. If you weren't there, if you just heard about it, if it's a Torah scholar, it's good to tear your garment. If you only heard about it and it's such a kind of saintly person, it's good to tear your garment. Generally speaking, the practice is, even though there is an obligation, most people don't do it unless they're present or they learned from that person or they benefited from the loving kindness of the upright person or they learned directly from the Torah scholar. Regarding the loss of an upright person, and many Torah scholars count as this kind of saintly person, if you hear that such a person has died and you're moved, even if you're not immediately moved, but you kind of reflect on what's been lost, what the world has lost, the scholarship of this person, the kindness of this person, the saintliness of this person. When you reflect on what's been lost and you allow it to go through you so that you're moved and you cry, those tears are stored in heaven under your account, as it were. Tears that you shed for the righteous people of our generation, for the great saints of our generation, for the upright people, for the Torah scholars, account as a tremendous merit to each of us in heaven. And it causes other sins that we've committed to be forgiven. And vice versa, when such people die and we just go on about our day as if nothing has happened, that is counted against us. and may even result in losing days of our lives. Maybe more than days. Now, the Mishnah also mentioned one who tears in anger. This is different, right? I mean, one might be angry that there has been a death, and then it's related to grieving, but not necessarily involving a death. One who becomes angry about something and rips his clothing. Our Mishnah says that such a person is exempt because he's just doing a destructive act. It's not constructive. Rabbi Avin suggests, well, maybe it is a constructive labor, and the person should be liable for violating the Torah prohibition of tearing, right? Because what's constructive about it is that it assuages his anger. We receive an answer to, Rabbi Avin receives an answer to this idea from Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the name of Chilfa bar Agra, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. One who tears in anger or breaks vessels, somebody who freaks out and breaks stuff, right? Somebody in the kitchen, he's angry, throws a pot, throws a glass, throws a plate. Great scene, and not a great scene, but a memorable scene in the movie The Godfather. If you're familiar with it, I went to UCLA Film School, and we were very fortunate to have Francis Ford Coppola, the director, come and visit our class. It's just like 30 of us in a seminar, and he spent 3 hours with us telling us stories about his directing career. One of them was when he was directing The Godfather. There were people who thought he was too young, too immature, too inexperienced, going to throw this whole project in the toilet. Because what happened was when he got the job, it was just some, mafia movie. And then while they were still in pre-production, the book came out and became a bestseller. And suddenly The Godfather was a very important project for Paramount Pictures, but its director was this very young guy, Francis Coppola. So he starts directing, and the first scene that they filmed was the wedding. And for days and days, they were filming this beautiful, happy scene at a wedding. And it was like, this is a crime movie, right? This is a crime drama. Where's the crime? Where's the guns? Where's the fighting? Where's the shoot 'em up? And they were lobbying to get him fired. And Robert Evans, the head of the studio, was under a lot of pressure to fire Coppola. And so they were going to send the action director to observe Coppola to see if he knew what he was doing in terms of making an action movie, a crime drama. And the day that this observer came to the set, what was being filmed was the scene where Talia Shire, James Caan's sister in the movie, is having a fight with her husband, Carlo, who she finds out has been cheating on her. A domestic scene. And Coppola needed to make it violent lest he be fired. And so he said to the actors, look, you can't hit each other, but I need some violence in the scene. And Talia Shire is actually Francis Coppola's sister, and she wants to help out her brother not get fired from the set. So she, in that scene in the movie, if you remembered, is throwing plates all over the place. Like she must throw 30 plates, smashing the plates. So there's the little mental picture for you. One who smashes vessels, smashes plates, or tears clothing, or scatters money in anger. We are supposed to view such a person, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, as one who worships idols. Why? Because today, his anger leads him to smash stuff. Tomorrow, his anger will lead him to worship strange gods. In other words, somebody who gets so possessed by their anger that they lose control and start breaking valuable things, that is a person who cannot be trusted to maintain good values. If we say that they're going to become an idol worshiper, what we're saying is they're going to eventually become guilty of the worst sin there is. There are 3 capital sins in the Torah, the worst 3 sins: idol worship, murder, and crimes of sexual immorality like rape. Those are the top 3. This one is right now mentioning idol worship, but by the same token, such a person who's so given over to anger that they'll just break things, That's a person who can become a murderer. That's a person who can become a rapist. That's a person who can become violent. Tragically, somebody that I knew well in college, in their family, there were 4 siblings. One of them was somebody who had never hurt a person, but for years was having fits of fury that would lead him to break and smash things. And eventually, this person killed his own sister and attacked his own mother and almost killed her. Now this person is, put away for life. You cannot allow yourself to be possessed by your anger. All of us have tantrums. All of us become that angry. That is a trait that we need to root out of ourselves. Rambam, Maimonides, explains, anger is an extremely undesirable character trait, and it is appropriate for a person to uproot all vestiges of this emotion from his character. Now, Rambam and the sages will distinguish between out of control anger and appropriate anger. So he will say, the early sages said that one who becomes angry is as if he worships idols. However, if one wants to instill fear for educational purposes in the members of one's household or as a community leader in one's community, it is permitted to create the impression that he is angry. Right? So if somebody's making a speech and banging on the dais, on the podium, as it were, to make the point and to impress on people that, hey, there's a great injustice in society and we need to right that injustice. Okay, that is a demonstration of a holy passion for educational purposes, and that's okay. But what we need to understand for ourselves is that we need to root out anger that can take over us, because the more one gives into anger, the greater the hold that anger will have on him or her. And eventually that hold can become so great that one's anger can completely overpower them and lead them to do terrible, terrible things. We must fight against the trait of anger in ourselves and try to root it out. And when we learn that the sages would sometimes, with minimal damage, sort of like vent anger in front of people for educational purposes because they could control their anger and it was just, a show of anger to make a point, I would say, good for the sages. They could do that. We're not sages. We must be very, very careful about how much anger we permit ourselves to indulge in. And remember the lesson. One who allows himself to be overcome by anger and smashes vessels, scatters money, tears clothing, is like one who worships idols. A grave, grave sin. Having said all that, in terms of liability for violating Shabbos, one who, just breaks things in anger, he's simply destroying. He's not doing anything constructive, obviously, as we've just seen. So while he's doing something that's bad behavior, he's not going to be liable for violating Shabbos as a Torah prohibition in what he tears down. That is what I've got for us today. Now let me check which questions and comments Nina is lining up for me. Lynn Jobs says, a very helpful set, speaking about the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch, the 5-volume set that I mentioned earlier today. And Lynn asks, how does one make restitution for violating a rabbinic decree in this day and time? We don't. I think that the thing to remember is that the rabbinic decrees exist to protect us from coming to violate the Torah laws, right? The rabbinic decrees are a fence around the Torah, keeping to distance us from sin so that we don't come to violate a Torah law and become liable to bring a sin offering if we do it unwittingly, which is particularly important these days when we can't bring the sin offering. But generally speaking, whether it's for an intentional violation of a Torah prohibition or a violation of a rabbinic decree, when we realize that we have violated halakha, that we have violated normative Jewish law, then we need to do a self-examination. Why did I violate that? Was I just being lazy? Was I just giving in to doing what I want for me and not, saying, okay, God, I really want to do this thing, but I'm not going to do it because I love you. I fear you. I'm just going to let it go. Every time we do that, it's an incredibly holy practice. And the more we do it, the better we get at it. And the more we give in to sin, the better we get at that. We saw that yesterday in that teaching about the letter Kuf, which reminds us of Kadosh, holiness. And the Kuf is open. And we learn this, historic and famous teaching from the Talmud that there are openings in holiness in heaven, right? And those openings are, if we want to go sin, we're going to get opportunities to sin. But if we want to rise, elevate ourselves, get away from sinful practices, we will get support for that from heaven. So it's all about doing that work. And every time we realize we have violated a halakha, we need to do that examination, pray for help that we don't do it again, make a teshuvah, sort of make an organized practice out of saying, okay, what practices am I going to bring into my life so that I don't violate that law again? And giving tzedakah, giving to charity, will strengthen our resolve in that process of growing. Sharon Frant Brooks, isn't the Shema an expansion of the first commandment as it immediately follows the retelling of the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy? Sure. I mean, the first line of the Shema is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." Right? So it's a declaration of who is God and what is our relationship with God. But then what immediately follows is the ve'ahavta, right? And we are commanded to love God. This, on the one hand, you could say, well, that's ridiculous. How could God be commanding me to love him? It's weird for parents to say, you shall love me to your children. I mean, we instinctively almost recoil from that. Like, if you command me to love you, the last thing I'm going to do is love you, right? But when God issues such a command, it's a great service to us. It's a gift that he gives to us, because what he's saying to us is, I'm not easy to love. I'm invisible, right? God is not present in our lives, doesn't speak to us out loud the way he did with Moses and other prophets, the way he did with all the people at Mount Sinai. So for us to have a relationship, we need to work on it. We need to build that relationship with God. And by remembering, right, if we care to be Jews who fulfill commandments, well then, like, this primary commandment of thou shalt love God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy resources, like, we got to take that command seriously. Not just, yeah, I know I'm supposed to love him. Yeah, I love him. I mean, to create love for an invisible being takes work. How do we do it? By dwelling, by thinking, by reflecting about all the blessings that God is constantly showering us with, by learning more about God, by studying his Torah, by spending time with God, by praying 3 times a day. All of those things will create love for God, and that's how we can fulfill that commandment. Zipporah Bank in the house says, good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom from LA. Love your Talmudic teachings. It's great to have you here, Zipporah. We miss you and look forward to having lunch with you when we can be visiting again. Bill Eldridge says, regarding the passing of the righteous, does this apply to non-Jews as well? Let us say, for example, Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Do tears shed for such a one get listed to our credit in the heavenly court? I would have to say, Bill, that the answer is yes, because, I mean, the language here, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi said that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said in the name of Bar Kapara, anyone who sheds tears over an upright person, the Holy One, blessed be he, counts his tears and places them in his treasury. As it is stated, you have counted my wanderings, put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book? I think it says pretty clearly that when you see such a person who lived a beautiful, upright life, it doesn't matter what their background is. We should, allow ourselves to feel that. We should cultivate that mourning, that deep grief, that sadness that the world has lost such a person. Rav Steinsaltz says, an upright person is one who is not suspected of transgressions or of failing to fulfill mitzvahs. Since there are the 7 Noahide commandments, which are incumbent on all human beings, there's nothing that says here that that upright person must be a Jew. Rabbeinu Yonah writes that this refers to one who actively seeks to fulfill the commandment of loving kindness, chesed. One can be considered upright even if he is not a Torah scholar. So, there you go. And Sharon Frant Brooks adds, I was taught that one does not wear the torn garments on the Shabbat during Shiva, however. I've heard that too. I'd have to look it up to be sure, but it makes sense according to what we're learning now, right? If the person dies in front of you and you are liable for violating Shabbos if you tear your garment, we might still do it. We might just desecrate Shabbos in that case. We probably won't even think about it, right? And so it's like we're just so emotional. We do it. We have fulfilled our obligation, but it's considered a desecration of Shabbos, so it would have been better to wait, let's say, until that night to tear the garment. But what we learn about the Shiva is it's that 7-day period of intense grieving for the immediate relatives. If it's so, I'm just not sure, but if it's so, that we shouldn't wear the torn garment, which we do wear every other day of the Shiva, right? People wear the mourner wears the same clothing that they're wearing when they learn the death throughout the Shiva, but not on Shabbos, because Shabbos is Shabbos, right? Shabbos even interrupts that intense grief, and we don't have the same practices in the Shiva house on Shabbos that we have on the other 6 days of that week. All right, my friends. I think Nina's typing, and this will be the last one. L'chaim. Ooh, a lot of, what do you call it? Condensation on this drink. I need my, where'd it go? I need my coaster. By the way, no one's ever asked, but this book is a book I really care about very much. It's Carl Sandburg's biography of Abraham Lincoln. I don't mean any disrespect to Carl Sandburg by resting the bell or my drink or the candle that I used during the shows on top of the book. I just needed to elevate it. But I would not do that with a holy book. Nina says, never mind, I answered it. Okay, my holy sisters and brothers, good Shabbos to you. May you have, may the peace of Shabbos surround, envelop you tonight and for the 25 hours which follow. May your holy second soul, which descends from Shemayim, descends from heaven to join the soul that's in our body, right? We get an extra measure of our soul on Shabbos. We're a little bit closer to the world of souls on Shabbos. May we feel that peace. May we feel that holiness. And may we feel the joy of Shabbos wherever you are.